In a quiet village surrounded by thick forests, everyone knew one rule: never stay outside after 8 o'clock. By then, the sun would be gone, and the moon would cast its pale light over the village. It was during this time that the bush baby roamed. The villagers whispered about it in hushed tones. They said it was a small, strange creature that carried a magic mat and cried like a helpless baby. The cry was so sad and real that anyone who didn't know the story would feel sorry and rush to help. But those who did never came back. One night, as the village lay in deep sleep, a faint sound echoed through the streets. Wah! Wah! It was soft at first, like a baby far away. The sound moved slowly, coming closer and closer. The elders had warned everyone, "When you hear the cry, stay in your house. Don't open your door, no matter what." But not everyone had heard the warnings. New visitors or brave hunters sometimes stayed in the village and didn't take the story seriously. That night, the cry grew louder. It sounded like a baby left in the cold, shivering and scared. A young man who had just moved to the village heard it. He didn't know about the bush baby. Who would leave a baby outside at this hour, he wondered. He lit his lantern and stepped out into the chilly night. The sound pulled him toward the forest. The streets were empty, the air heavy with silence. His footsteps echoed as he walked closer to the crying sound. When he reached the edge of the forest, he saw a small bundle on the ground. It was wrapped in cloth and moving slightly. The crying came from it. "Poor thing," he muttered as he bent down. But before he could touch it, the bundle opened. Out jumped a creature with glowing red eyes, long fingers, and a wicked grin. It screeched loudly, throwing a mat on the ground. The mat began to spin and glow, and the young man felt himself being pulled into it. The villagers woke the next morning to find his lantern lying near the forest. The young man was gone, and only the wind whispered through the trees. The bush baby had struck again. From that day, the villagers made the rule even clearer. When you hear a baby crying at night, do not open your door. The bush baby is always waiting. The bush baby was not an ordinary creature. It carried a strange, glowing mat everywhere it went. This mat was no normal mat. It had magical powers. It was said that anyone caught by the mat would disappear forever. Nobody knew where the mat came from, but the elders in the village believed it was cursed. They said the mat could trap people and carry them to a dark, faraway place where the bush baby lived. Some said it was a cave deep in the forest. Others believed it was a world that no human could return from. The bush baby used the mat to catch anyone who followed its cries. It would throw the mat on the ground, and it would begin to spin. The mat glowed with strange, bright colors, and anyone standing near it would feel their body being pulled in. Once the person disappeared, the bush baby would fold the mat and carry it away, as if nothing had happened. The villagers often wondered, why does it cry like a baby? Why does it take people? The elders said the bush baby was once a child who was left in the forest long ago. The child cried for help, but no one came. Over time, it turned into a creature full of anger and sadness. It used the mat to take people because it didn't want anyone to leave it alone, just like it was left alone. But no one could be sure if this story was true. The only thing the villagers knew for certain was this: once the mat took you, you would never come back. This is why the villagers always stayed inside at night. They locked their doors, blew out their lanterns, and whispered prayers. They knew the bush baby and its magic mat were out there, waiting for someone to make a mistake. One quiet night, The village was dark, and everyone had gone to bed early. The wind blew gently, and the forest seemed calm. But then, just as the clock struck midnight, the sound began. Wah! Wah! The cry of a baby echoed through the streets. It was soft at first, but as the minutes passed, it grew louder and more desperate. Inside one of the small huts, a boy named Obi sat up on his mat. Obi was new to the village and had never heard of the bush baby. When he heard the crying, his heart sank. Who would leave a baby outside? Obi thought. He lit his small lantern and opened the door. The night air was cold, but the crying pulled him toward the forest. As Obi walked, he saw something lying on the ground at the edge of the forest. It looked like a small bundle wrapped in cloth. The crying came from it. "Don't worry, little one. I'll help you," Obi said softly as he bent down. But as soon as his hand touched the bundle, it moved. The cloth fell away, and out jumped the bush baby. Its red eyes glowed like fire, and its long fingers reached for Obi. The creature screeched, a sound so loud it made Obi freeze in fear. Before he could run, the bush baby threw its magic mat on the ground. The mat began to spin, glowing with bright, swirling colors. Obi felt a strange pull, like the mat was sucking him in. "Help!" Obi shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the night. The mat spun faster and faster, and in a flash, Obi was gone. The bush baby folded its mat, tucked it under its arm, and disappeared into the forest. The next morning, the villagers found Obi's lantern lying at the edge of the forest. They knew what had happened. "The bush baby has taken him," an elder said with a heavy sigh. From that day on, the villagers made sure everyone, young or old, new or familiar, knew the warning. When the baby cries, stay inside. But deep in the forest, the bush baby and its magic mat waited for the next person to forget. It had been many months since Obi disappeared, but the villagers still remembered him. They still remembered the cry, the glowing mat, and the horrible screech of the bush baby. But life in the village went on. People tried to forget, but the fear was always there, lingering in the air. One night, just as the moon began to rise, a group of travelers came into the village. They were strangers, 2 men and a woman, walking through the village on their way to another town. "We've heard stories about this place," one of the men said. "People say it's a safe village, that the villagers are friendly. But there's something strange about the way everyone looks at us." The woman, Chica, smiled. "They're just scared of us because we're new. We're not afraid of stories. We've traveled far and wide, haven't we? We'll be fine." The villagers watched from their windows as the travelers set up camp near the edge of the forest. No one spoke, but everyone knew what would happen if the travelers stayed out too long. As the night grew darker, the travelers sat by their fire. But then the cry came again. Wah! Wah! The travelers looked at each other, puzzled. "What is that sound?" Chica asked. "It's a baby crying," one of the men said. "Should we help?" "Don't go!" An old man from the village shouted, running toward them. "It's not a baby! It's the bush baby! It will take you if you go near it." The travelers laughed, thinking the man was just trying to scare them. "We're not afraid of old stories," they said, waving him off. But the crying grew louder, pulling them toward the forest. They walked to the edge, and there, just like before, they saw a small bundle on the ground, wrapped in cloth. "It's just a baby," Chica said, bending down to pick it up. As soon as her hand touched the bundle, the cloth fell away, and out jumped the bush baby with its glowing eyes and long fingers. It screeched, and before the travelers could run, the creature threw its magic mat on the ground. The mat glowed and spun, and in a flash, the travelers were gone. The next morning, the villagers found their camp empty. The fire had died out, and there were no signs of the travelers, just their bags left behind. The villagers whispered the same words they always whispered when someone disappeared. The bush baby took them. And so, the village went quiet again, but deep in the forest, the bush baby and its magic mat waited, ready for the next people to fall for its trick. Each night, someone would vanish, and the villagers would remember the warning. Never follow the baby's cry. It's a trap. The village was quieter than ever after the three travelers vanished. No one dared to leave their homes after dark, and everyone kept their doors tightly shut by 8 o'clock, just as the elders had warned. The cry of the baby, once heard only once in a while, now seemed to be a constant reminder of the bush baby's power. One afternoon, a young boy named Ifeanyi arrived in the village. He was traveling alone, looking for his uncle who lived in the next town. He had heard of the village, but nothing about the bush baby. He was excited to see new places, and the villagers' nervous faces didn't bother him. "Welcome to our village," an old woman greeted him with a kind smile, though her eyes were full of worry. "Thank you," Ifeanyi said, looking around. "It's so peaceful here. I'm staying the night before heading to my uncle's." The villagers exchanged looks, but said nothing. They had learned that telling outsiders about the bush baby didn't always help. Sometimes, curiosity was too strong to ignore. That evening, as the sun sank low, Ifeanyi sat outside, enjoying the cool breeze. He noticed how quiet the village seemed. Then, as darkness spread across the sky, he heard something, soft at first, like a far-off cry. Wah! Wah! His curiosity took over. He stood up, looking around. The sound was coming from the edge of the forest. He remembered the village woman's words earlier. "Don't go near the forest after dark." But Ifeanyi wasn't afraid. "It's just a baby," he thought. "Someone must have left it behind." Ignoring the warnings, he grabbed his lantern and began to walk toward the cry. The wind whispered in the trees, but the sound of the baby's cries only grew louder, pulling him closer. As Ifeanyi reached the edge of the forest, he saw it, just like the stories said. A small bundle was on the ground, wrapped in cloth. It was crying softly, as if begging for help. "This must be it," Ifeanyi said, crouching down to pick it up. But as his fingers touched the cloth, the baby's cries turned into a sharp screech. Out jumped the bush baby, its red eyes glowing in the dark, its long fingers reaching for him. He gasped in fear, but before he could run, the bush baby threw its glowing mat on the ground. The mat spun wildly, shining with colors that made Ifeanyi dizzy. His body felt heavy, like he was being pulled into the air. "Help!" he cried, but his voice was swallowed by the spinning mat. In a flash, Ifeanyi was gone. The next morning, the villagers found his lantern on the ground, but no sign of Ifeanyi. They didn't need to speak. The look in their eyes said it all. The bush baby had taken another victim. That evening, the village gathered at the center, and the elder stood in front of them, holding a small, worn book. "To the curious, to those who do not believe the stories," she began, "this is the warning we must all remember. The bush baby is real. It waits for those who are brave enough to ignore the cries, for those who believe they can outsmart it." She paused and looked around the circle. "Ifeanyi's story will not be the last, but it must be the last warning you ever need. Remember, when you hear the cry of a baby at night, do not go. Stay inside. Keep your doors locked, for the bush baby is always waiting, and it will take those who listen to its call." The villagers nodded. their hearts heavy with the truth of the warning. The bush baby was real, and no one, no matter how curious, was safe from its trap. As the sun set and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, the village went quiet, and the doors locked tightly once more. The magic mat and the bush baby waited in the dark, ready to strike again.